She hit me, right in front of everyone." The boy's voice cracked as he pointed toward the woman sitting at the defense table, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. The courtroom, filled with a mix of curious onlookers and concerned parents, buzzed with whispers. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the air felt heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation of what would unfold. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a beloved teacher at Lincoln Middle School for 25 years, known for her warm smile, patient teaching style, and the way she bought lunch for kids who forgot theirs. She was the kind of teacher parents prayed their children would have. She had a knack for making every student feel special, for seeing the potential in each child, even when they couldn't see it themselves. But today, she was the defendant in a criminal assault case, a stark contrast to the nurturing figure she had always been, the charge, striking a 13-year-old student named Kyle Thompson. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the woman who had dedicated her life to education. Evelyn sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart breaking as she listened to the accusations being hurled at her. She had always believed in the power of words, but today those words felt like daggers, piercing through her reputation and her spirit. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed man with a commanding presence, stood before the jury, painting a harsh picture of the incident. "A teacher is supposed to protect children, not harm them," he declared, his voice echoing in the courtroom. This woman crossed the line. The words were like a slap in the face, and Evelyn felt her heart sink further into despair. How had it come to this? How had a moment of intervention turned into a criminal accusation? As the prosecutor continued, Evelyn's mind raced back to the day of the incident. It had started like any other day in her science class. The students were excited, buzzing with energy as they prepared for a hands-on experiment. But then Kyle had begun to act out, throwing paper balls across the room, disrupting the lesson. She had asked him to stop, her voice calm but firm, but he had cursed at her, his defiance palpable. Moments later, chaos erupted when Kyle tripped another student, causing her to hit her head on a desk. In that split second, Evelyn had reacted. Instinctively, placing her hand firmly on Kyle's shoulder to pull him back, to prevent further harm. That was it. No slap, no punch, just a protective gesture. But by the time Kyle went home and told his parents, the story had morphed into something unrecognizably. She hit him. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, half the people convinced that Evelyn had finally snapped, while the other half, former students and colleagues, were stunned that such an accusation could even exist. They had seen her dedication, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to her students. How could anyone believe that she would intentionally harm a child? Evelyn sat silently, her heart racing as she listened to the prosecutor's words. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. This was not just about her freedom. It was about her name, her career, and her life's work. She had poured her heart and soul into teaching, and now it felt as if everything she had built was crumbling before her eyes. As the prosecutor continued to paint a picture of a violent teacher, Evelyn's mind drifted to her students. She thought of the countless hours she had spent after school helping them with their homework, the times she had stayed late to organize science fairs, and the moments she had shared with them during lunch, listening to their dreams and fears. She had always believed that teaching was more than just a job. It was a calling, a way to make a difference in the lives of young people. But now, as she sat in that courtroom, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The whispers grew louder. and she could see the judgment in the eyes of the parents and community members who had once admired her. The prosecutor's words echoed in her mind, and she felt a wave of despair wash over her. How could she defend herself against something so utterly false? As the first witness took the stand, Evelyn's heart raced. It was one of Kyle's classmates, a girl who had been sitting nearby during the incident. The girl's voice trembled as she recounted what she had seen, her words vague and uncertain. "I don't really know what happened," she said, glancing nervously at the prosecutor. "I just saw Mrs. Carter grab Kyle's shoulder." Evelyn's heart sank further. This was not the testimony she had hoped for. The truth was murky, and in the court of public opinion, a teacher accused of hurting a child was already guilty. She could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes, the way they shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they listened to the testimony. As the day wore on, Evelyn felt the walls closing in around her. She was fighting not just for her freedom, but for her very identity. She was a teacher, a mentor, a protector of children, and yet here she was, being painted as a monster. The weight of the accusations pressed down on her, and she struggled to hold back tears. When the court adjourned for the day, Evelyn stepped outside, the cool air hitting her like a wave. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the courthouse, but all she could feel was the chill of uncertainty. She had always believed in the power of truth, but now she was beginning to wonder if it would be enough. As she walked to her car, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Marcus Lee, her lawyer, who had been by her side throughout this ordeal. "Evelyn," he said gently, "I know this is hard, but we will get through this. You have to trust the process." She nodded, but doubt lingered in her heart. "What if they don't believe me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus looked her in the eye, his expression serious. "The truth only works if you speak it. You need to share your story, your side of this. You have to show them who you really are." Evelyn took a deep breaths, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within her. She had dedicated her life to teaching, to nurturing young minds, and she would not let this moment define her. She would fight for her name, for her legacy, and for the countless students who had walked through her classroom doors as she drove home that evening. She reflected on her journey. She had faced challenges before, but this was different. This was a battle for her identity, her passion, and her purpose, and she was determined to emerge victorious, not just for herself, but for every child who had ever walked into her classroom, seeking guidance and support. The road ahead would be difficult, but Evelyn knew one thing for certain: she would not back down. She would stand up for herself and for the values she had always held dear. And as she pulled into her driveway, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Evelyn Carter sat at the defense table, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the prosecutor paint a damning picture of her character. The courtroom was filled with a mix of curious onlookers, parents and former students, all of whom had come to witness the trial of a woman they had once admired. The air was thick with tension, and Evelyn could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her as the prosecutor concluded his opening statement. Evelyn's lawyer, a tall man named Marcus Lee, stood up to address the jury. He was a seasoned attorney with a reputation for being both passionate and persuasive. He adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the jury before he began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice steady and confident, "this is a story of truth being twisted, And by the end of this trial, you will see that Mrs. Carter is guilty of only one thing: caring too much. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope at his words. She had known Marcus for years. He had been a family friend and had always believed in her. He understood the kind of teacher she was, and she trusted him to tell her story. Marcus continued, explaining that the incident had occurred during a science class. Kyle Thompson, the alleged victim, had been throwing paper balls, disrupting the lesson, he said, pacing slightly as he spoke. When Mrs. Carter asked him to stop, he cursed at her. Moments later, in a fit of reckless behavior, he tripped another student, causing her to hit her head on a desk. Evelyn's heart sank as she recalled that chaotic day. She had been trying to maintain order in her classroom, to create a safe environment for all her students. But Kyle's behavior had escalated, and she had felt compelled to intervene. Mrs. Carter had no intention of harming Kyle. Marcus continued, his voice rising with conviction. She simply placed her hand firmly on his shoulder to pull him back, to prevent him from causing further harm. That was it. No slap, no punch. Number. Violence. But by the time Kyle went home and told his parents, the story had changed. She hit him. Evelyn could see the jury's faces, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. She knew that the truth was often overshadowed by emotion, and she hoped that Marcus could cut through the noise and reveal the reality of the situation. The prosecution called classmates to the stand, each one giving vague answers, unsure of what they had seen. Their testimonies were filled with uncertainty, and Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The truth was murky, and in the court of public opinion, a teacher accused of hurting a child was already guilty. As the witnesses left the stand, Evelyn's heart ached. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for her name, her career, and her life's work. She had dedicated herself to teaching, to nurturing young minds, and now it felt as if everything she had built was crumbling before her eyes. After a long day of testimony, Marcus turned to Evelyn, his expression serious. "Do you want to take the stand?" he asked, his voice low. Evelyn hesitated, her heart racing. "What if they don't believe me?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Evelyn," Marcus replied gently, "the truth only works if you speak it. You need to share your side of the story. You need to show them who you really are." Taking a deep breath, Evelyn nodded. She knew that this was her chance to reclaim her narrative, to show the jury the woman behind the accusations. The next day, as she prepared to testify, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. When it was finally her turn to take the stand, Evelyn's heart raced. She walked to the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she took her seat. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she reminded herself of the countless students who had looked up to her over the years. "Mrs. Carter," Marcus began, his voice calm and reassuring, "can you tell the jury about your experience?" As a teacher, Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "I have taught thousands of children," she began, her heart swelling with pride. "I have hugged them when they cried, bought them shoes when theirs had holes, and stayed up nights worrying about them. I did not strike Kyle. I stopped him from hurting someone else. That's all." As she spoke, she could see the jury leaning in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to curiosity. She continued, recounting her years of dedication to her students, the late nights spent preparing lessons, and the joy she felt when a child finally grasped a difficult concept. "I love teaching," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's not just a job for me, It's my passion. I've always believed that every child deserves a chance to succeed, and I've dedicated my life to making that happen." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she spoke about the students who had come to her for help, the ones who had struggled and needed someone to believe in them. "I would never intentionally hurt a child," she insisted, her voice firm. "I care too much about them." When she stepped down from the stand, Evelyn felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Had her words reached anyone? Would they believe her? She glanced at the jury, hoping to see understanding in their eyes, but their expressions remained inscrutable. As the trial continued, the pressure mounted. The prosecution pushed hard, showing photos of Kyle's red shoulder taken the next day proof, they claimed, of an aggressive grab. The judge watched silently, his expression unreadable, while Evelyn's friends filled only a few pews in the courtroom. The rest were parents who had heard rumors, here to see justice served. Evelyn felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She had always been a protector of children, and now she was being painted as a villain. The emotional toll was immense, and she struggled to maintain her composure as the trial dragged on. But through it all, she held on to the hope that the truth would prevail. She had dedicated her life to teaching, and she would not let this moment define her. She would fight for her name, for her legacy, and for the countless students who had walked through her classroom doors seeking guidance and support as the days passed. Evelyn found strength in the support of her friends and former students who had come to testify on her behalf. They spoke of her kindness, her dedication, and the impact she had made on their lives. Each story was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, and it fueled her determination to see this through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trial reached its climax. Evelyn sat in the courtroom, surrounded by the people she had once taught, now standing guard around her like a wall of love and loyalty. She knew that the truth was on her side, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The fight for her name, her career, and her life's work was far from over. But she was determined to emerge victorious. The trial dragged on for days, each moment stretching into what felt like an eternity. Evelyn Carter sat in the courtroom, her heart heavy with anxiety and uncertainty. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the whispers of the spectators echoed in her ears like a haunting refrain. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, and it was suffocating as the prosecution continued to present its case. Evelyn found herself grappling with a mix of emotions: fear, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. She had dedicated her life to teaching, to nurturing young minds, and now she was being painted as a monster. The prosecutor, with his sharp suit and commanding presence, was relentless in his pursuit of a conviction. He painted a picture of a teacher who had lost control, a woman who had crossed the line from protector to aggressor. "Look at the evidence," he urged the jury, displaying photographs of Kyle's red shoulder taken the day after the incident. "This is proof of an aggressive grab, a clear indication that Mrs. Carter acted out of anger rather than concern for her students." The images flashed on the screen, and Evelyn felt her stomach churn. She knew the truth, but how could she convey that to a jury who only saw the surface of the situation? The judge watched silently, his expression inscrutable, while Evelyn's friends filled only a few pews in the courtroom. The rest were parents who had heard rumors, eager to witness what they believed would be justice served. Evelyn's heart sank as she scanned the faces in the crowd. Some looked at her with pity, while others wore expressions of disdain. She felt like a pariah, an outcast in a community that had once embraced her. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Teachers who had worked alongside Evelyn testified about her kindness and patience, sharing stories of her dedication to her students. They spoke of the countless hours she had spent after school helping those who struggled the way she had gone, above and beyond to ensure that every child felt valued. But despite their heartfelt testimonies, the prosecution pushed hard, determined to paint a different narrative. Mrs. Carter's actions were not those of a caring teacher, the prosecutor argued, his voice rising with intensity. They were the actions of someone who lost control, someone who put her own frustrations above the well-being of her students. Each word felt like a dagger, and Evelyn could see the jury's expressions shifting, doubt creeping into their minds. Evelyn's lawyer, Marcus Lee, remained steadfast in his defense. He was a tall man with a calm demeanor, and he had been by her side throughout this ordeal. He understood the stakes and was determined to fight for her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said during his cross-examination of the prosecutions. "Witnesses, you've heard from students who were present that day. But what you haven't heard is the full story. You haven't heard about the years of dedication and love that Mrs. Carter has poured into her students." As the trial continued, Evelyn felt the emotional toll weighing heavily on her. She was not just fighting for her freedom, she was fighting for her identity, her legacy, and the countless lives she had touched over the years. The thought of losing everything she had worked for was unbearable. One afternoon, as the trial dragged on, Marcus turned to Evelyn during a break. "Do you want to take the stand?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Evelyn hesitated, her heart racing at the thought. "What if they don't believe me?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Evelyn," Marcus replied gently, "the truth only works if you speak it. You need to share your side of the story. You have to show them who you really are." His words resonated with her, and she knew he was right. She had to take control of her narrative, to reclaim her voice in this chaotic situation. When it was finally her turn to testify, Evelyn felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She walked to the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she took her seat. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she reminded herself of the countless students who had looked up to her over the years. "Mrs. Carter," Marcus began, his voice calm and reassuring, "can you tell the jury about your experience?" As a teacher, Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart swelling with pride as she began to speak. "I have taught thousands of children," she said, her voice steady. "I have hugged them when they cried, bought them shoes when theirs had holes, and stayed up nights worrying about them. I did not strike Kyle. I stopped him from hurting someone else. That's all." As she spoke, she could see the jury leaning in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to curiosity. She continued, recounting her years of dedication to her students, the late nights spent preparing lessons, and the joy she felt when a child finally grasped a difficult concept. "I love teaching," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's not just a job for me, it's my passion. I've always believed that every child deserves a chance to succeed, and I've dedicated my life to making that happen." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she spoke about the students who had come to her for help, the ones who had struggled and needed someone to believe in them. "I would never intentionally hurt a child," she insisted, her voice firm. "I care too much about them." When she stepped down from the stand, Evelyn felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Had her words reached anyone? Would they believe her? She glanced at the jury, hoping to see understanding in their eyes. but their expressions remained inscrutable. As the trial continued, the pressure mounted. The prosecution pushed hard, showing photos of Kyle's red shoulder taken the next day proof, they claimed, of an aggressive grab. The judge watched silently, his expression unreadable, while Evelyn's friends filled only a few pews in the courtroom. The rest were parents who had heard rumors, eager to witness what they believed would be justice served. Evelyn felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She had always been a protector of children, and now she was being painted as a villain. The emotional toll was immense, and she struggled to maintain her composure as the trial dragged on, but through it all, she held on to the hope that the truth would prevail. She had dedicated her life to teaching, and she would not let this moment define her. She would fight for her name, for her legacy, and for the countless students who had walked through her classroom doors seeking guidance and support as the days passed. Evelyn found strength in the support of her friends and former students who would come to testify on her behalf. They spoke of her kindness, her dedication, and the impact she had made on their lives. Each story was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, and it fueled her determination to see this through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trial reached its climax. Evelyn sat in the courtroom, surrounded by the people she had once taught, now standing guard around her like a wall of love and loyalty. She knew that the truth was on her side, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The fight for her name, her career, and her life's work was far from over, but she was determined to emerge victorious. It was the final day of testimony, and the atmosphere in the courtroom felt tense, the air thick with judgment and anticipation. Evelyn Carter sat at the defense table, her heart racing as she prepared for the closing arguments. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, and the uncertainty of the outcome gnawed at her insides. Would the jury see her for who she truly was, or would they succumb to the narrative painted by the prosecution? As the prosecutor prepared to deliver his closing argument, Evelyn's mind raced back to the testimonies that had unfolded over the past few days. She had listened to her former students speak passionately about the impact she had made on their lives, but she had also heard the vague and uncertain accounts from Kyle's classmates. The truth felt like a fragile thread, easily frayed by the harsh light of scrutiny. The prosecutor stood before the jury, his voice steady and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the evidence. You have seen the photographs of Kyle's shoulder, and you have listened to the testimonies of his classmates. A teacher is supposed to protect children, not harm them. Mrs. Carter crossed the line, and she must be held accountable for her actions." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and Evelyn felt her heart sink. But just as the prosecutor was about to conclude, a movement caught everyone's attention. The back doors of the courtroom swung open, and a wave of people began to file in. First, a young woman in a business suit, then a man in a firefighter's uniform, then another in military fatigues. Dozens of them, people of all ages and walks of life, filled the empty seats until there wasn't a single spot left. They were Evelyn's former students. Evelyn's heart swelled as she recognized familiar faces from her past. Each one of them had been touched by her kindness, her dedication, and her unwavering belief in their potential. As they stood, one by one, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. A young mother spoke first, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mrs. Carter paid for my college application when my parents couldn't afford it. She believed in me when no one else did." The jury leaned in, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. A police officer followed, his voice strong and clear. She was the first person who told me I was worth something. I wouldn't be here without her. More voices joined in, each story a piece of a legacy Evelyn didn't even realize she had built. A former student who had struggled with learning disabilities shared how Evelyn had stayed after school to help him catch up, never once making him feel less than capable. Another spoke of how she had organized a fundraiser to help a family in need, demonstrating compassion that extended beyond the classroom walls. As each former student took their turn, Evelyn felt a mix of pride and humility. She had always believed in the power of education, but hearing these stories reminded her of the profound impact she had made on their lives. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism, now buzzed with a sense of community and support. By the time the last person spoke, even the judge was leaning forward, listening intently. The atmosphere had transformed from one of judgment to one of solidarity. Evelyn's heart raced as she realized that these former students were not just testifying for her. They were standing up for the values she had instilled in them: kindness, resilience, and the importance of believing in oneself. As the last student stepped down, the prosecutor's confident demeanor faltered. He had not anticipated this wave of support, and it was clear that the jury was now grappling with a different narrative. The tide was turning, and Evelyn could feel a glimmer of hope igniting within her. When the jury was finally sent to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. It felt like hours as Evelyn sat frozen, surrounded by the people she had once taught, now standing guard around her like a wall of love and loyalty. She could see the concern etched on their faces, and it filled her with a sense of gratitude. They believed in her, and that belief gave her strength. As the minutes ticked by, Evelyn's mind raced with thoughts of her career, her students, and the life she had built. She thought of the countless hours spent preparing lessons, the late nights spent worrying about her students' futures, and the joy she felt when a child finally grasped a difficult concept. She had dedicated her life to teaching, and she refused to let this moment define her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreman stood, his expression serious as he addressed the courtroom. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." The words hung in the air for a moment before the courtroom erupted in quiet gasps and tears. Evelyn covered her face, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. Relief washed over her like a tidal wave, and she felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. Her students, now grown, rushed to her side, embracing her with tears in their eyes. They had stood by her, and now they were celebrating her vindication. "Mrs. Carter, we knew you'd win," one of her former students exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn felt a surge of love and gratitude as she looked around at the faces of those who had come to support her. They were not just her students, they were her family. As the judge dismissed the case, Evelyn took a moment to collect herself. She looked at the jury, who were now rising from their seats, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. They had seen through the fog of accusations and had chosen to believe in her truth. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of justice and the strength of community. As she walked out of the courthouse, Evelyn looked at the crowd of people who had come to stand for her. For the first time in months, she felt the burden of doubt and fear begin to dissipate. She had walked into that courtroom, accused, but she was leaving. It reminded of something far greater. The measure of a life is not the accusations made against you, but the lives you've touched along the way. The sun was shining brightly outside, casting a warm glow over the scene. Evelyn stepped into the light, feeling the warmth on her face. It was a new beginning, a chance to reclaim her life and her career. She had fought hard for her name, and now she was ready to move forward as she made her way through the crowd. She was met with hugs and congratulations from her former students and friends. Each embrace felt like a balm to her soul, healing the wounds that had been inflicted during the trial. They shared stories of how she had impacted their lives, how she had believed in them when no one else did. Each story was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, and it fueled her determination to continue making a difference. "Mrs. Carter, you're a hero," one young woman exclaimed, her eyes shining with admiration. Evelyn smiled, feeling a mix of humility and pride. She had never seen herself as a hero. She was simply doing what she loved, teaching and nurturing young minds. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Evelyn felt a sense of camaraderie and unity among her former students. They were no longer just kids in her classroom. They were adults who had taken the lessons she had taught them and applied them to their lives. It was a beautiful reminder of the ripple effect that a dedicated teacher could have. Once outside, Evelyn turned to face the crowd, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you all for being here today," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Your support means the world to me. I want you to know that I will continue to fight for what is right, not just for myself, but for every teacher who dedicates their life to making a difference." The crowd erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had faced the darkest moment of her life, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. She had learned that the truth would always prevail, and that love and support from those around her could light the way through even the darkest of times. As she made her way to her car, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not just a teacher. She was a leader, an advocate for her students, and a champion for kindness and understanding. The battle had been hard fought, but it had only strengthened her resolve to be the kind of teacher who made a difference. In the days that followed, Evelyn returned to Lincoln Middle School, greeted by cheers and applause from her colleagues and students. The halls that had once felt heavy with judgment now buzzed with excitement and support. She was back where she belonged, ready to continue her mission of nurturing young minds and inspiring the next generation. Evelyn knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. She had learned that true strength comes from within, and that the love and support of a community could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. With her head held high and her heart full, she stepped into her classroom, ready to embrace the future and continue making a difference in the lives of her students. So if you believe in the power of storytelling to spark change, if you want more narratives that challenge bias, uplift heritage, and teach respect, then this is your space. Subscribe to the US Black Stories today. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that just might change the way you see the world, and leave us a comment. What did this story make you feel? What did it teach you? Your voice matters here. The more we grow, the more stories we can share. And in a world filled with noise, we choose to tell the stories that matter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for believing that every voice, every life, and every legacy deserves to be heard.